Good evening and welcome to Live and Let Live for Saturday, May 26th, 2007. I'm Gary Johnson. Tonight on Live and Let Live, we're going to be talking with Tom Lynch, and he's going to be talking about the strange world of divorce and custody battles and all of the trouble that he and many other Texans have to go through with attorney's costs and delays and paperwork and anxiety. And it's a very interesting subject. It affects a lot of people. And if you're not directly involved with this, you probably don't know anything about it, but maybe you should learn more about it. Tom Lynch, welcome to Live and Let Live.
Well, thank you very much, Gary.
Let's begin at the beginning. Tell me a little bit about yourself. What do you do?
Well, I was a microprocessor designer for a number of years, and then I owned my own consulting company.
You're a micro what?
Microprocessors, yes.
What is that?
All the chips that make the computers go.
So you design computer chips?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And you were married, and you got a divorce.
That's correct.
And you have a son.
I do, yes.
And so you got a divorce, and it was very simple, and that's the end of the story.
If only. Yes, it was a very complicated matter. It was very emotional and difficult on everybody, and it turned out to be unexpectedly very expensive.
Expensive.
Yes.
Well, I think we're going to talk about that a lot because it's important to understand why is it expensive. So as we go through the show, I want you to kind of explain that to us. Explain to us, first of all, how does divorce work in Texas? As I understand, it's its own separate court system. Is that right?
Yeah, divorce has differentiated itself from both civil and criminal proceedings, and in many areas has its own court venue.
What's it called?
It's typically a family district court.
Family district court.
Yeah.
And the judges, are they elected?
Yes, typically district judges will be elected, and some will specialize in family proceedings. It depends on the area and if they can support that much family business, which typically isn't very hard nowadays.
Really?
1 out of 2 marriages are ending in divorce.
So, and what kind of law are they enforcing?
Oh, that's a really good question because in most people's view, and mine going into it,
yes.
I felt that we were just canceling a marriage license.
Right.
And instead, we got more attention than, say, a capital murder trial would get. You know, I went and watched the yogurt shop folks over in Mike Lynch's court, and I was surprised to see fewer people than were in at my divorce.
You said the yogurt shop. I think nearly everybody knows what you're talking about, but
yes.
Briefly, what was that? It was a big murder trial.
Oh, yes. Some young girls at a yogurt shop were murdered, and the perpetrators were unknown for years, right. And a huge investigation ensued. So
you had this big murder trial, and you're saying that was different from your trial, your
well,
case.
Of course, yes.
But
yes.
But you felt that a murder trial would be bigger. You'd have more people involved, and you believe it was the other way around? Or?
Yeah, I was having a hard time imagining what a trial like that would be, given how complex our simple divorce was. And in point of fact, it looks simpler.
Well, why was that?
I think, in my opinion, the divorce has... Divorce is a kind of work that's steady, and over the years has evolved to be a source of revenue for the social system.
All right.
And like Thomas Hobbes said, the philosopher, all organizations strive to aggrandize their budgets. I mean, everybody wants to get ahead, mm-hmm. And you imagine a department full of people that want to do better in their careers, and as they struggle to do that, they need to bring in more business in their departments. They need to find that they can do more things, and they need to find that their jobs are important.
Mm-hmm. All right. So when you say that your trial was different, or a divorce trial is different from this big murder trial, you're saying that there were more people involved with your case than there were with a murder trial.
Yes. Yes.
What kind of people?
Well, the judges, especially if it's contested with children, the judges will often offload a great deal of their liability in making a decision to a secondary role that is sort of an artificial court. These are defined in the Texas Family Code. There are now 4 positions defined for this. There's an ad litem, a guardian ad litem, an attorney ad litem, an attorney amicus, and a dual role is what they call. And these people will in turn order services that they feel are needed in order to take care of the people who are getting divorced. There's a great deal of concern about care, very expensive care that will, chances are, leave the people who are divorcing regretting they had it. But
Yes.
yes.
All right. I want to go through those 4 things that you talked about in a moment, but let's kind of set the stage here about divorce and how is it. What normally happens in a divorce? What's the default position in divorce with children? I guess we're going to be talking about divorces with custody.
Well, enlightened folks can do it themselves, and they can avoid the system. However, most people going into a divorce are very anxious. They're vulnerable, and in addition, they're isolated. There was a report that came out this year. It's called "Social Isolation in America." It's an interesting article to look up. The number of friends that Americans have who they're willing to tell personal things to has been steadily dropping from the 1960s and has now hit 0. So these vulnerable people will be getting their advice from the professionals they hire or are assigned to.
Okay.
Typically, those aren't the most sage sources for advice. In old times, I suppose, not that long ago, in small towns, maybe even my hometown.
Yes.
If I were to be divorced, the people at the church would be helping people out and trying to make sure that as much of what could be salvaged could be. But the people that we went to for our divorce were, I think, motivated by supporting their private practices. Attorneys are small businessmen, and they're in practice to make a profit.
And we're going to talk about how this seems to occur over and over again in your experience about attorneys taking advantage of this situation where someone is vulnerable, they don't have this family or friend support system, and they turn to their attorney for this support. And your experience has been that sometimes attorneys aren't really that supportive.
Well, it's yes, but it's complicated in that the typical practitioner did not design the system. To some extent, the system has evolved into place. Another unusual thing about divorce practitioners is that they're their own bosses. It's not like when you hire a contractor to come out work on your place who's reporting to somebody else. It's more like a contractor that was just reporting to themselves.
Okay.
And so there's nobody to correct them, no one to say that, maybe this is getting a little exaggerated or something. And in addition, many people divorce isn't the sexiest area of law, and some people have gone into divorce practice because they have motivations. I know of one attorney that went into divorce practice. She lost her kids when she was younger, and wanted to see that other women didn't experience the same thing, I believe. Other people have political motivations. There is a lot of, we're in tumultuous times culturally right now, and there are a lot of people with cultural opinions who will take, even though their values are not like either spouse, they will take advantage of an opportunity to insert those values into a family that is breaking apart.
All right. I actually wanted to find out what normally happens in a divorce. And so let's kind of begin the process about the normal divorce in Texas, and how that normally works. So as we go through this process, we understand the steps.
Okay. The first step, a person will hire an attorney.
Mm-hmm.
And that's difficult because there's a very shallow referral system for family practice attorneys.
So when you get an attorney, you get a specific kind of attorney.
Oh, yes. You have to get somebody who practices family law.
All right.
And family law has its own code book. There's the family code. And to some extent, it has its own rules. As we were mentioning, sometimes it has its own venue. And it's also conducted differently than other kinds of law in terms of how the parties will communicate or plan.
So there are these, what they're called, family lawyers, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Family law.
Family law lawyers. All
Yes.
right. So you want to get a family law lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You have a big choice. Is that right?
No, actually, it's like everything else in Austin. It's growing. I recall looking in the phone book at time I got divorced in 2001 and seeing about 40. Of those 40, there were 10 that were considered it was their core practice.
Okay.
People who do family law sometimes will do adoptions. Some people will do an uncontested divorce, where the spouses aren't fighting. Wouldn't that be nice? And but if you're going to go through a contested divorce, at the time I went into it, there were roughly 10 people, and they all knew each other. They go to dinner together.
Mm-hmm.
They go to conferences together. They do their continuing education sometimes together.
Okay.
And they even have common hobbies together. Collaborative law is a big hobby for these folks right now.
What's that?
I'm not real familiar with it.
Okay.
Familiar with it. Yeah.
So, but you want to get a lawyer, and it's got to be a certain kind of lawyer. How do you pick your lawyer?
Well, that's what I'm saying. There's really 3 routes. One is a person will ask someone else who got divorced.
Yes.
That's a very shallow referral. That person has one experience.
Okay.
You could look in the phone book, like I mentioned.
Okay.
You could call the Texas State Bar Lawyer Referral Service.
All right.
The Lawyer Referral Service isn't a very deep reference either, unfortunately. They don't track any statistics of any kind, except if an attorney has discipline actions against them. So it's roughly like using the phone book, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, a person can also go and interview an attorney. That's actually a really interesting experience. In my experience in interviewing attorneys, I found that there was sort of a song and dance that accompanied that. They want your business.
Okay.
So they try to figure out how to connect with you, like they're your friend. They're trying to cover that social isolation base.
Okay.
They would like you to think they empathize. So after you've gotten an attorney, the next step is to serve the opposition, and that's usually a fairly ugly thing. They'll get a constable to go to your spouse's office or wherever, and everybody's looking, and they serve you a piece of paper like you're a criminal, which is unfortunate because that sets the tone.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so the process sort of begins, and so you get a divorce, and that's the end of it.
Yeah, that's how I imagined it, actually. And so we were preparing for this afternoon hearing.
When was this?
In 2001.
Okay.
And in June of 2001. And my attorney was talking to all the witnesses, and I had imagined that my witnesses would go speak and her witnesses would go speak, and then we'd end up splitting things 50-50 pretty much, right? Then I learned about temporary orders and the standard decree. Actually, I was very fortunate in our initial hearing. I came out of it with what's called a sole managing conservatorship, which means that my son lived with me, and that I was able to make education and medical decisions for him. That's unusual. Usually, it's the other way. Women are favored for custody in the court system. But after we were leaving the hearing, I found out that we were going to do it again in 6 months. You had to get divorced twice.
Twice.
Twice, yes.
Now, was this just your case, or is this all cases?
This is typical. This is the way it's done. They do divorces twice.
What is the difference between the first and the second?
Well, the first divorce was, in a sense, a little more like I imagined a divorce to be, in that there weren't, we didn't have a lot of connections to any government services. There weren't any government parties assigned to the divorce. But right after the first divorce, we were assigned a guardian ad litem. And this guardian ad litem had values very different from either my ex-spouse's or mine. But the guardian ad litem favored her position, so in my ex-spouse's position.
All right.
Yeah.
Before we get into that,
Yes?
you had your, I guess, hearing or your decision. What happened to you in the first go around? You got your son's custody.
Right.
So yours just sort of that was, I guess, pretty easy. Now this. What is the difference, I guess, between what you had to do to get through that process and what you had to do to get through your second process 6 months later?
Oh, yeah. Well, the thing is that the second one wasn't an event. The second one was something that had duration.
So was there an actual, what is it called, a trial?
A final hearing.
Final hearing. Was there an actual final hearing?
Yeah, final hearing is a misnomer as well, but as you might imagine. There was. We after the temporary orders hearing,
Okay.
the fight became very dirty. All of the records were taken from my office in my consulting practice.
Were taken. Who took them?
Well, presumably my ex took them. They showed up in her attorney's office.
Your ex-wife took your records.
Yes, for my practice, and
How-
emptied out all the filing cabinets, and she had
how
all
did
the
she-
software and everything. I had an office at the house.
She, well, I mean, was that, how did, I mean, how, she did it physically, but I mean, did she have a subpoena or what?
No, it was, the door was locked in the office, and they got in, and
They?
I say they loosely because I think that this is a very unethical action to take, and I do not believe that, or I should say, I do not assume that it was my ex-wife's idea.
Okay.
And so her attorney then called, her attorney was Sarah Brandon, and Sarah Brandon called Paul Drake over at AMD and alleged to Paul Drake that I had AMD's files in my office. And Paul did a smart thing after that. Said, "Well, then send them to us. They're ours." Then the issue died. But a great deal of damage had been done. I felt very embarrassed. AMD was very confused, and I haven't had a contract with them since.
Okay. So I guess the important thing is that your records were taken.
Yes.
It's not clear to me, was it legal to take your records?
I do not believe so, but there's two dimensions to every lawsuit. One dimension is the legality by the statutes,
Mm-hmm.
and the second dimension is the procedure. And the first step in the procedure is to find an attorney. And I could not, my family practice attorney at the time, my first family practice attorney asked for a $35,000 retainer and announced that the money was spent immediately.
What's a retainer?
Oh, that's an interesting aspect of this as well. Attorneys typically don't take any risk in their actions. They get the money that they expect to charge up front, and that's the retainer. They can spend more than the retainer and send invoices for that after they pass the retainer. Typically, they like to keep the money in the account to exceed their expected billing at all times.
All right, so
Yeah.
he asked for a retainer,
Yes.
but your records are gone.
Right. Well, and at that,
You're trying to
yes.
get an attorney to get your records back.
Well, the reason I was trying to find an attorney to get my records back is because of the first attorney left the case when I wouldn't give him a second $35,000. That was Mr. Ted Terry. Mr. Ted Terry's office called me and told me that the summer possession agreement we had would be lost and that no further work would be done on my case. Indeed, my records wouldn't even be returned, though they changed their tune on that, if I didn't pay him another $35,000 that week.
All right. I really don't want to get into too much detail about your case. I want to talk more
Okay.
about general cases.
Okay.
But it seems to me that in your case, the fact that your records were taken, which may or may not be an unusual situation, affected your ability to make money, to hire attorneys, among other things, to go to the process to get your records back.
Yeah, that's a conundrum that a lot of people run into, and it keeps coming up in the divorce. To give you another example of that, suppose at one point I had a disagreement with my ex about travel expenses.
Okay.
And the travel expenses are what is $1,000, something like that, and you think, well, are you going to put down a $5,000 retainer to try to recover $1,000 of travel expenses? That conundrum comes into play in a lot of things.
So
Yeah.
this is sort of a theme that comes up over and over again, is that you get trapped into something where in order to do something, you have to do something else. In order to do that, you have to have money. In your case, it was hard to earn money because your business records were in limbo somewhere.
Well, it wasn't just that the records were in limbo, is that my consulting entails a lot of generation of intellectual property, and that's inventions and patent stuff.
Right.
And everybody I did work for wanted their stuff kept secret. They didn't want anybody to. They didn't want anybody to find a way to sue them through relationships that I might have with other clients, and so everybody was mad at me. That was maybe the worst part. So
you had part of your situation is that you're unable to do certain things that might have normally happened because you didn't have the ability to earn a living, and so this kind of puts you in this kind of trap.
Right. Eventually, it led to a new decree, a final decree that was very generous to my ex. It led to a lot of compromise. Yes.
All right. So in the first time around and the second time around, you have a custody decision. The first time around, you had a custody decision going
Yes.
one way. Second time, you had it going the other way. Explain to people what custody is and how that works either way.
Well, unfortunately, and there are some attempts to change this, and some people are managing to do it differently now, but the vast majority of the cases that follow what is set by the Texas legislature and now a great deal of precedent, they call it the standard decree. The standard decree is a winner-take-all approach to custody, and they have a lot of trouble finding politically correct terms for giving away your kid. They called it conservatorships, but then they used the term possessory conservatorship, and this is now, as if you could possess a kid. This has now given way to what they call primary and secondary, kind of these emotionally neutral terms. But what it usually amounts to is dad becomes a losing paying visitor, and mom is the parent of the kid.
So this is the standard.
Yes.
Is this your interpretation of this, or does the law actually say this?
The law actually says it. It says that dad will have odd weekends, an off week Thursday, and all school days will be going to mom. The standard, they claim that it's nearly 50-50 calendar time, but it's not even close. If you imagine, you only have your kid a weekend every 2 weeks. How's that 50-50?
Yes, I was going to say, how do you do? They do the math there?
Yeah, you leave out school days. And
okay.
then you count weekend visits over summer as 50-50 time.
All right.
Yeah.
So, the child custody is that, and you also have the issue of child support.
Yeah, child support turned out to be very different in nature than I had imagined as well. You would think that the money would go into an account and then that somebody would put receipts against the account. Or you'd imagine some sort of accounting that the money would actually be benefiting your child. But it doesn't work like that. The money is, first of all, it's guaranteed by the government. Every week, I see the prosecutor. He goes out to the courthouse. He's wheeling out a stack of papers, yay high. He tells me there are thousands of cases in there. The government regulates and demands that the fathers pay it. It's the only form of debtor's prison, except maybe the IRS in the U.S. But there's no accounting for the money after it's paid, and in effect, it has two practical effects in a controversial divorce like mine. One effect is that it makes it so mom can afford to keep the kid away from dad. If the child spent 50% of the calendar time with each parent, you'd say, why would you need to exchange money? And indeed you wouldn't. So the system, while claiming to split things 50-50, also claims not to, that it's not 50-50 and the mom needs more money to make up for the difference in the time that she has the child. That whole thing is based on a presumption dad doesn't want to see his kid, and that's typically not the case. The second effect I've noticed that child support has is mom's not as worried about lawsuits because she's going to take your child support check and spend it on the attorney. It's not coming out of her paycheck. And it could be dad instead if it goes the other way. But typically mom has the child.
So you had a hearing. You were going to have the final hearing, and you ended up with an agreement, I guess.
Right. We made we had an agreed settlement, which ostensibly ended the divorce.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't imagine this agreed settlement would stay. Actually, I felt that I had been blackmailed into that agreement. Strong arm tactics, basically. I thought that I was just buying myself some time so that I could garner another war chest, so to speak, hire another attorney, point out the shenanigans that had gone on, and then set things right. But that was not to be.
All right. Now I want to, we're about halfway through the show, Tom, so I'm going to shift here and say you're watching Live and Let Live here on Channel 10 on Saturday nights, and I'm Gary Johnson, and we're talking with Tom Lynch, and he's talking about the experience that he's gone through as a father, as someone who went through a divorce and is going through a custody battle. And we've sort of gotten the arrangement, Tom, where you are now, you've gotten, I guess, the equivalent of your final hearing. You've got an agreement. And one of the things I want to talk about is now the expenses that still seem to be occurring. You're paying for things, and you're also, it seems like your life is being controlled by various people. And you mentioned something called an ad litem earlier in the show, and there are 4 kinds of these. So can you explain that to me and to the audience? What are these 4 categories?
Typically, there'll only be one out of the 4. I believe it's statutory that some combinations won't be used. There are a large number of services associated with a divorce. There can be, for example, the introduction of a custody evaluator. The courts are very suspicious of witnesses. They don't want regular folks telling them what's going on. They want their buddies to figure that out instead.
Can you explain what you mean by that a little bit better? I mean, more. I mean,
Okay, so
it's like,
there's a community of people that work in family practice. Some people call it the divorce industry.
uh-huh.
Well, in fact, there's about, depending on who you ask, there's $70 billion to $150 billion a year spent in the divorce industry. So it's probably not a bad term. And these people make their money from people who are divorcing, and they ostensibly provide services so instead of that afternoon hearing that you expect,
Yes.
because there's two steps at least, and there can be more, in that interim period, the ad litem plays the role of a broker for the family practice court, and he gets to assign which person gets to provide certain services, and so you imagine that broker is very popular.
Well, the ad litem is, I think you said this earlier, doing the judge's job.
Yeah, the ad litem plays judge, investigator, attorney, interrogator.
Why doesn't the
yeah.
judge do that? Or why doesn't the judge make a decision? Did
You know-
Solomon have an aide? Or,
Yeah, at our last hearing, my ex-wife was asked on the stand if she wanted a custody evaluator, and she said, "Isn't that what we're doing?" I felt like standing up and clapping. I think that the judge assigns an ad litem. Well, for one thing, it offloads responsibility for the next election. When the ad litem's report comes back and the custody evaluator's report comes back, a judge can side with those folks, and if things don't work out, the primary responsibility goes back to the folks who it's their job to make the decision. So by offloading his job to another party, he also offloads the responsibility for the outcome. In addition,
who pays for the ad litem?
of course we do.
The taxpayers.
No, the spouses.
The spouses.
Well, there's a book here written by Kevin Thompson.
Kevin Thompson?
Yeah, he wrote a book in Massachusetts. He called it "Exposing the Corruption in the Massachusetts Family Court System."
Okay.
And one of the judges in his case has banned the book. Amazon has taken it off their site, but you can still find it over at Lulu.
Okay.
And
Okay. All right.
he goes through all of
Lulu is a website, lulu.com.
www.lulu.com.
Okay.
Yes, LULU.
Okay.
Or I'll have a contact at the end of the show. You can ask me for any of the sightings I
Well,
mentioned.
actually, I don't know. If Matt, can you
Yeah.
put the email address up on the screen here? You have an email address, is that right?
Yes, that's right. I would like to hear from anybody that has an experience to share.
All right. That's
Yeah.
Dimitri's dad.
Dimitri's dad, yeah.
Dimitri's dad, and so if people want to contact you either with information or if they want to find out about research that you've done.
Right. Anyways, Kevin in his book lists money that comes into the family court system.
Mm-hmm.
It's hundreds of millions in the locality where he's at.
So in this case of this ad litem, how do you spell
Yes.
that?
AD, then a space, and it's LITEM.
So the judge, instead of acting like a judge, offloads this,
Right.
outsources it, I guess,
Right.
to the ad litem, and you're paying for the ad litem?
And I'm paying for the ad litem, and the ad litem can
And
in
I guess
turn,
your spouse is paying. Is it
Right.
50-50?
well, it may not be. For example, in my case, the judge has seemed to have decided that I am financially more secure than my ex and has assigned an interim attorney's fee, so I get to pay for her side of it as well.
All right. So,
Yeah.
but the judge, instead of doing the judge's job, gets an ad litem or one of these four categories,
Yes.
and the spouses pay for it.
Right. And the ad litem has another effect, which is interesting. The ad litem can in turn offload responsibility to the custody evaluator, who is more expensive.
Oh, really?
Yes.
And so you also have to hire or may have to hire a custody evaluator.
That's correct. And it goes on from there.
So there are, this is part of the reason that I wanted to talk about this, because there are so many expenses that come up. Attorney's fees, I guess their court costs, although you seem to never go to court, I guess, so they're probably
that's
you
right,
save
that's
money on that. But the court is ordering the hiring of all of these people, and you pay for them.
Yeah, I got the form here. Let's we can see.
Okay, if I can, Lorraine can
I
help
don't.
us zoom
It's
here.
really hard to read. I can read it for you, but
Lorraine, let me hold it up. Go to that camera there.
well, can you? You probably
Oh.
can't. There's a series of check boxes
Yes,
that limit the ad litem's power, and as you go,
you can zoom
through
a
here-
lot closer, Lorraine, and focus it as well.
Well, as you can see, that her power is not very limited in this case. Every single box is checked, so
Well, what
she
are we
can do anything
looking
she
at
wants.
here?
Well, this one says
Well-
therapy, counseling, education. Oh, you should see the education system that's developing in Travis County. They have classes for everything now.
Classes.
Yeah,
Do you have to
classes.
take classes?
I didn't have to take any classes, but it's not uncommon for people to get very angry while they're giving away all their money and having to talk to all these experts when they expected to have the thing over in an afternoon.
Yes.
And then they'll be ordered to take an anger management course.
So so that's it, folks. Don't get angry.
That's for sure. Actually, in fact,
Because if you get angry, they make you take an anger management course.
so this as you can see, everything is checked here. So the guardian ad litem shall give an opinion on mother and father, children. The guardian ad litem shall select a therapist. Oh, here we have a therapist for mom, dad, and children. Guardian ad litem shall give an opinion, should attend parenting courses. Guardian ad litem shall give an opinion, participate in anger management counseling, family violence counseling, batterers intervention program, and there are, in here, Travis County Counseling and Education Services. The guardian ad litem shall give an opinion on whether should submit to psychological evaluation. So that's separate from all the therapists, and that's separate from the custody evaluator. I counted 8 or 9 actors in here. The ad litem shall select a mental health professional to conduct a psychological evaluation. This is a separate check from the previous psychological evaluation. I don't quite understand that.
Okay,
Yeah.
you said therapist. Is that the same thing as a psychologist, or is that different?
Oh, actually, that's really interesting. I was going to bring up Robin Dawes' book, hopefully. Robin Dawes has gone off and studied all these psychologists and therapists to see if they actually do anything.
Who is Robin Dawes?
Robin Dawes is a professor over at Carnegie Mellon. He's a very respected statistician, sociologist, and psychologist, and he's in the psychology department there. He's won a lot of awards, and he's written a book called House of Cards. And he showed, for example, where there have been now hundreds of studies done that show that psychologists can't predict anything. You may
Mhm.
as well throw a dart at the
Right,
wall.
right.
And yet, my government's going to force me to pay somebody to predict something.
Now, on
Yeah.
this list here, it seemed to me there a lot of these things are the ad litem is deciding whether or not you need these things.
Well, yeah. Well, the ad litem is deciding whether or not her buddies get paid.
So the ad litem knows all these people.
Oh yes, and they're sure to introduce themselves to the ad litems. In
Now-
fact, there's a department of ad litems.
So I guess in a sense, you said you didn't have to go to anger management. You haven't had to go to a lot of even though the ad litem could order a lot of things, you haven't been ordered to do some of the things. So it could be worse.
Well, actually, in my case, I was able to catch a few things that other people might not have caught. I've done business in Austin a long time, and I happen to know people involved. So this ad litem, for example, assigned Peggy Farley to be the child psychologist, neutral, court-appointed child psychologist. Well, Peggy Farley's a divorced woman, like so many of us now are divorced, And when she got divorced, she used my ex-wife's attorney. That kind of, that conflict my attorney refused to point out, but I pointed it out.
Why is that important? You're the psychologist who is okay. The judge picks an ad litem. The ad litem picks a child psychologist. The child psychologist is going to be. I guess you'll tell me in a moment what the child psychologist does, and the fact that the child psychologist has some kind of conflict of interest because your child psychologist's lawyer is the same as your ex-wife's lawyer. Why is that important?
Well, because the child psychologist, like myself, is having to pay her lawyer. And there's a relationship of favoritism there.
And how does that favoritism play out?
Well, in our case, it played out when Peggy Farley said on the stand that she hadn't received a call from me when she had, and it was documented. Peggy Farley presented a very favorable evaluation of my ex-wife, even though she was a child psychologist. And I should say there's Go ahead.
Well, I'm going to say, you threw me there. I thought that the child psychologist evaluates the child.
Well, those relationships of favoritism seem to spurn enthusiasm.
So I guess what I'm getting at is the child psychologist is doing something on behalf of the court. What difference does it make if the child psychologist is not really neutral?
Well, the first thing that happens is that in psychology today, you really make a distinction between forensic psychology and therapeutic psychology. And this is done...
what is the difference?
Well, in therapeutic psychology, the psychologist is helping an individual cope with an issue or...
It's therapy.
It's therapy.
That's why I asked you if this psychologist is the same thing as a therapist.
This psychologist was supposed to be my son's therapist. But she betrayed that relationship
and
by
there's
also
two kinds
being
of things: therapist and forensic.
Right. Now, a forensic psychologist is chartered with figuring something out. So, for example, is somebody capable of taking the stand? Is somebody dangerous?
When I hear forensic, I think of crime dramas on TV.
But no, that's an unfortunate term, forensic. It really should be investigative.
Okay.
I suppose there might be cases where it's forensic, but there's no physical evidence involved like you would imagine with typical forensics. It just means that the psychologist is going to render an opinion.
All right. So there's a difference between a therapeutic psychologist and a forensic psychologist. What's the difference?
Well, the therapeutic psychologist develops a trusting relationship with their patient in order to assist the patient.
Okay.
A forensic psychologist may attempt a trusting relationship, but it's not for the benefit of the patient. The forensic psychologist is there typically for the benefit of answering a question.
All right. So you had a child psychologist for your child.
Yes.
And that child psychologist was supposed to be therapeutic.
Correct.
And you believe that was not the case.
Well, she came to a hearing that violated the trust. And Dimitri was very young at that time, and he may or may, people don't give kids enough credit. They figure a lot of stuff out, and they're very concerned about what happens with their family. In fact, there's another dichotomy having to deal with family law. They call it child-directed and best interest of the child. I could give that out. But what happens is when a therapeutic psychologist shows up in a courtroom, that defies the expectations of the person that was in therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And although a child may not completely comprehend, they may figure it out later in life, or they may have some idea.
So this does seem to be significant from a political viewpoint, I must say, in that you have somebody who is assigned to be a psychologist. You're pouring your heart out, maybe revealing a lot of secrets, and then that person turns around and testifies on the witness stand about what you may have said. Yes,
that's a betrayal. That's an unethical thing to do. There is some debate in the community, but I think that there's a sense that's unethical, and it's a license violation, I believe, in Texas.
So the child psychologist, do you pay for that?
Yes.
All right, so this is another thing the bills are adding up here.
Well, let me tell you another thing about the child psychologist, which I found really interesting.
Well, let me go back
Okay.
before.
Okay.
Did your child have any problems before all of this? I mean,
Uh,
did your
no,
child
no,
need a
no,
child? Did your
no.
child need a psychologist?
No, that was a presumption of the ad litem.
What was the cover story for giving what you say is a normal, average child a psychologist?
The ad litem is more like a Chinese court. The ad litem doesn't have to follow any rules of evidence. She doesn't have to justify anything she does. She can keep secrets, and she can ask questions against those secrets, and she can do all of those things which we have very carefully in law designed out of our system. There's a culture in family practice of believing that psychologists can tell people their true story, and I know attorneys that believe that. They think that psychologists have some intuition. Robin Dawes studied this very question and found out they don't have intuition. They can't deliver on that, and statistically, and so it's a way to avoid having to follow civil procedure.
Yes. So you've got the court gives people power, and they are now doing all these things. And I think part of your main point is that the court gives somebody the authority to hire a bunch of people who are all their friends or business associates, and you're paying for all this. Now, one of the things I want to emphasize is that we've been talking a lot about your specific case, which may be unusual, but I wanted you to tell us how normal is this? I mean, how often are ad litems assigned? How many times do you have child psychologists? You've got a form here that's got a whole bunch of stuff checked off, so I guess it's pretty common.
Yeah, this is the status quo in family courts today all over the nation. This is the same kind of stuff you'll find in Kevin Thompson's book. I would like to put together a similar book for the Austin court family court system. And if anybody could help me by sending in their stories and such, I'd appreciate it.
All right, that's to your email address?
Yeah, okay, my email address.
Which is, say it out loud here.
Dimitri'sDad@gmail.com.
Okay.
All of the vowels are I's except in dad.
All right, and so you've got so much material. You're thinking of writing a book about it.
Yes.
And what about this custody evaluator you talked about earlier?
Yeah, the custody evaluator turned out to be conflicted initially as well, and we kind of dodged that bullet.
What is a custody evaluator?
Well, a custody evaluator is another miniature court system. The custody evaluator, again, is going to interview people, possibly talk to witnesses. Unlike in a court system with due process or Texas evidence rules, they're not obligated to talk to anybody. That they pick who's important, who's not. Once again, they evaluate evidence. Once again, it doesn't have to follow any due process.
Why isn't the judge doing this?
God, I would like to know that myself.
I mean, we are paying the judge.
Yes.
Are we paying? How's the custody evaluator paid for?
Yep. And that's,
You pay for
got
that
it.
too.
Yes, we pay for that.
So these the child psychologist, the ad litem, the custody evaluator, and who knows what else is on your list, depending on whether or not it gets checked off or not. What kind of money are we talking about?
Oh, well, an attorney in Los Angeles that does a lot of fathers' cases told me once that the running rate for a father to have custody of his children is about $300,000. Really, it depends. The first question any attorney is going to ask you when you go into their office is, how much money do you have? How much do you make? And that's going to determine, typically the divorce fight goes on until somebody runs out of money. So the amount of money you make will typically determine how long it goes on.
So you said $300,000. Kind of give me some kind of like a pie chart here. How much of that goes to attorneys? How much of that goes to the court-ordered ad litem, ad nauseum? How much?
Ad litem, child psychologist, parent psychologist, custody evaluator, teachers of courses, and there were a few other roles in there. Yeah,
Have you taken any courses?
I haven't taken any
Okay.
courses.
I think I asked you that.
I heard a funny story about the anger management course in Austin.
You say you hadn't taken anger management. You haven't taken any courses.
I
Okay.
haven't. I haven't been ordered to take courses, but Ellie, a fellow that did some work for me, was ordered to take anger management when he got divorced,
Mm-hmm.
and the anger management teacher hit one of the students, and the course was canceled. That's what Ellie tells me.
Well, I must say I'm not familiar with anger management classes, but I've always thought they were kind of a fraud. But I don't know.
I think this whole situation's a fraud. Here's what Kevin Thompson writes in his book. He says, "I am just one of thousands of fathers who have been victimized by the system of organized crime in the Massachusetts family courts." He's in Massachusetts. "This book exposes motives, tactics, hypocrisy." There's a couple of other books that are interesting.
Mhm.
Well, I've mentioned Robin Dawes' House of Cards.
Yes.
I think Christina Hoff Sommers' book, Who Stole Feminism and War on Boys, is a must-read for fathers and people in education that deal with a lot of students and such. Tammy Bruce, the former head of NOW, wrote a book about the new thought police, and she was talking. There's a sense in the women's movement that a change has occurred.
Tammy Bruce is a radio talk show host. Yeah.
Oh, is
Yes.
she doing that now?
Yes.
No, I didn't know that. But she, Paulo Freire is a political science philosopher. He wrote a book philosophizing about movements in general. And he was saying that when a movement reaches its point of fruition,
Mm-hmm.
that suddenly it finds that its resources aren't doing it a benefit. The people who get excited about an issue, who can attract people and make people come to demonstrations and such, are often not very good at handling the situation when parity starts to be achieved. Paulo Freire says it's the responsibility of leaders of political movements to strive for equality and for the issues to go away. That's what we want. You don't want dominance and supremacy. And I think that, in a sense, is starting to play out in our family courts.
Well, your divorce was in 2001,
That's correct.
and are you still paying for stuff 6 years later?
Oh yes. Well, I've
What
gone.
are you paying for now in 2007?
Well, I went back to court to get a modification. My son has been having some issues. He's a preteen now, and he's starting to do things that are more dad oriented. We're talking about sports and team play and things like that now. And he's been found to be socially lacking, and he's not playing sports. And he's also got the commensurate weight problem as somebody who's not active and such. And so I have decided, it might be time for Dad to spend a little more time with his son. And I thought my ex would find it wonderful that my son had a father who was willing to invest so much time and energy, but that was not to be.
So what are you doing, and what is it costing you? Or
Well, in approximately the 1 week period from the time that I gave my attorney a retainer, we went through one deposition and one hearing. I was invoiced for over $20,000.
$20,000.
Yes.
And you say a deposition. What's a deposition?
A deposition is yet another way to have a hearing without a judge. The attorneys get together and a person is put on the spot. The attorneys can make objections, but a written record is made anyway. So a great deal of hearsay and other things that are not allowed by normal rules of evidence are allowed into the record. The record gets into the court transcript, the court file, so it's there. It can be viewed by a judge, even if it wasn't hearsay. And, of course, that's paid for by the parties.
So I guess the theme that's coming through all of this, Tom, we're coming about 3 minutes before the show here, at the end of the show, is that the judge isn't doing the judge's job. Is that a key element here?
I would say,
And not just your judge. This is judges in the whole family court system?
Well, I've spent approximately $50,000 to see the judge's eyes, and that didn't happen until February of this year, and I started over a year before that.
And that there is this industry, as you call it,
Yes.
of advisors to the court, and the court offloads this to them, and they're all buddies. And once one is assigned to the task, then they hire their friends to help, and you end up with the bill.
Right. The thing that primarily drives this is trying to get out of that standard decree.
Mm-hmm.
And there's only two ways out of that standard decree. The parties agree, or one party asserts the other party's not a adequate parent. And so that immediately puts the person in a position of spending money, or they're not a good parent. That puts a person in a position of lying, or exaggerating,
Mm-hmm.
or bringing out the bad.
Yes.
At the very least. And this then is fueled by the people whose jobs are to handle cases that are bad. So 1 out of 2 marriages are ending in divorce. You look at a bell curve, at least 63% are just normal folks, right? You go out, probably it's more like 95. Yet this huge social system has developed which needs people to say that the other guy or the other woman is bad. And it's a bad situation.
Again, we're near the end of the show, Tommy. About 2 minutes left. If you want to repeat you're doing your research, maybe you'll write a book someday, and you want to hear from people. What's
Yes.
your email address?
Dimitri'sDad@gmail.com.
All right. And in about 1 minute left here, what do you think should be done if the legislature could change the law in Texas? What would be the main thing that they should do?
Well, the first thing they need to do, like Judge Lehrman said in Tarrant County, is they need to reduce the amount of time it takes to get divorced.
Yes.
That's tantamountly important for the child. They need to take allegations out of divorce. If there are criminal allegations to be made at the time of the divorce, as a Johnny-come-lately, and besides, there are other venues for that. People who are in jail do not get custody rotation, so there's no danger of a mistake being made there. Divorces should be purely civil.
Civil. So
Yes.
they're not really purely civil now.
No, the family courts have found themselves in a quasi-state between civil and criminal, with criminal-like things, orders being dispensed by judges, limiting where people live, or and things like that, and taking away people's liberties in terms of telling them they have to take classes and such.
Yes.
Yes.
So, Tom Lynch, I want to thank you for being with us here on Live and Let Live and explaining this to us. And it's not just your case, but the case of all that affects a lot of us. And you're pointing at something I'm going to have to say goodnight. And you can come back sometime and tell us more about this as you do more research. I'm Gary Johnson. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary.